Skin Deep, written and narrated by Saffron Bryant. Chapter 2. Ravyn hurled the wrench to the oil-stained cement and turned on Atoll, fists clenched. "I've told you 1,000 times I like it here." Atoll sighed and wiped thick fingers across his lined face. "But it could be better for you. You belong with them up there." "No, I belong here with you." Heat surged up Ravyn's neck, flushing her cheeks and making her bruised nose throb. Atoll picked the wrench up off the floor. "You're a desirable. I'm not. None of us down here are. You'd have so many more opportunities if you left. You wouldn't have to be a mechanic anymore." Ravyn rolled her eyes and took the wrench back. "You know as well as anyone how much I like it here. Can't you just be happy that I'm happy?" Atoll's lips twitched, revealing crooked teeth. "It would be easier if you didn't come home covered in bruises and with a broken nose. You know I only want the best for you." "Yeah, I know," said Ravyn. "But you haven't been up there with all the desirables. You'd want to carve your own eyeballs out, I promise. At least down here you know people are more than skin deep." He chuckled and hoisted the hover bike higher so she could reach underneath. "Yeah, I've had to listen to you complain often enough." Ravyn grimaced, the fiery anger dying down to a fierce simmer lower in her chest. "Well, it's a stupid system." "Yes, I know. We should all be allowed to skip through the streets regardless of our status and live happily ever after." Ravyn grunted. "Something like that." "Well, I've been around long enough to know that that's not going to happen." Atoll's grey speckled hair reflected the flickering yellow light hanging above their heads. Broken engines and pieces of machinery lined the worn workbenches, interspersed with rusted tools. "Besides..." "Ravyn! Ravyn!" Dorabella's high-pitched voice squealed through the workshop like a rusted axle. Ravyn glanced up at Atoll and rolled her eyes before turning to face the doorway. Dorabella Travelin burst in, her face flushed beneath a thick layer of foundation. Her blonde hair bounced around her face in perfect ringlets as she leant against the doorway with a gloved hand. "Ravyn, you're in the polls!" Ravyn sighed. "What are you talking about?" "The polls! For the Fairest of Them All!" Dorabella snatched the remote from the nearest workbench and jabbed it at the far wall. An image flickered to life. The evening news presenters sat in their usual seats, white teeth sparkling at the camera. A row of 8 portraits lit the screen behind them. The biggest portrait showed the Queen, Elena Vassia, her rich brown hair cascading over her shoulders. 6 of the other pictures showed men and women smiling with 2 white teeth. But the final portrait, tacked on the end like an afterthought, didn't belong. "See?" Dorabella squealed. Ravyn gaped up at her own picture. Unlike the others, it was grainy, taken from a surveillance camera as she hurried past. Her pitch-black hair looked like a shadow framing her pale face. Atoll stepped towards the screen, his hand held out. "It's really you." Ravyn shook her head. She tried to speak, but all that came out was a dull croak. She swallowed and tried again. "There's been a mistake, or someone's playing a trick." Dorabella's bright blue eyes sparkled as she beamed at Ravyn. "Listen!" Ravyn turned back to the screen and tried to focus on the voices. "And finally, we have a woman who's been identified as a Ravyn Alden," said the female presenter, Macy Cristal. "Not what we usually see here in the polls," said Richard Bryce. "You can say that again, Richard. In fact, we've been informed that Ravyn Alden works in the Undesirable district as a mechanic. Can you believe it?" "What's she doing there? Do you think it's some kind of publicity stunt?" Richard said. "I don't know, but I think we can both agree that she belongs on this list. Look at her. Her lips are as red as blood, her hair as black as night, and skin as white as snow. She'll make a splash at the Queen's court no matter how the final rankings turn out. Speaking of which, Queen Elena is still in front, closely followed by Ravyn, and then..." Dorabella pressed mute and grabbed hold of Ravyn's arms. "See? I told you! You don't belong down here! I'm so jealous I could kill you!" Ravyn swallowed and stepped back, not sure whether Dorabella was entirely joking. "You're going to be part of the court, and imagine if you won, Ravyn! You could be queen!" Ravyn took another step backwards and bumped into a workbench. I'm not going to court. Dorabella froze, eyes locked on Ravyn. What? Ravyn took a deep breath, eyes darting around the room for any escape. The walls seemed to be closing in on her, pushing the air from her lungs. You know how much I hated up there with the Desirables. Can you imagine me in court? I went 2 meters into the Desirable district yesterday and look what happened. She gestured to her swollen nose. I don't belong there. This isn't something you can turn down. Dorabella waved her hand around the workshop. You should have moved out of this district years ago. Do you know how much effort I've put into trying to get the opportunity that just landed in your lap? Do you know how many hours I spent getting dressed in the morning, and you just fell out of bed in a heap of rags? Dorabella's chest heaved under the thick blue fabric of her dress, and her cheeks flushed scarlet. A dangerous glint flickered across her eyes as she stared at Ravyn. So take my spot, Ravyn yelled back. I don't want it. It's ridiculous that a beauty contest decides who runs the kingdom. Dorabella gritted her teeth. It's not a beauty contest. It's Fairest of Them All, and without it, we'd be living in chaos like the outer settlements. No, without it, we'd have a system of government that actually works. Dorabella tilted her chin up and looked down her nose at Ravyn, glancing sideways at Adol. Obviously, you've been spending too much time with the Undesirables. You've picked up some of their views. Atoll bent behind the hover bike and resumed fixing the engine. Ravyn clenched her fists and stepped forward, anger replacing fear. They're people just like you and me. I hardly think so, Dorabella said, folding her arms across her chest. Atoll has done more for me than any of your precious Desirables. I'd pick him over Queen Elena any day. You must be crazy. Dorabella sniffed and whirled for the door, leaving in a flurry of swishing skirts. Atoll emerged from behind the bike and sidled towards Ravyn. She has some points. No, she doesn't. Don't you think it's weird that Queen Elena has won the poll for 20 years in a row? No one can be fairest in the kingdom for that long. Atoll fiddled with the end of his torn shirt. There have been other winners. Yes, and where are they? His eyes flew to the floor and he frowned. Dunno, I think one of them had an accident, was deemed undesirable after that. Ravyn grabbed a hammer from the bench and hurled it into a metal toolbox. Exactly. Seems pretty suspicious to me. When will the poll finish? Ravyn's mouth thinned into a line. Tomorrow. Let's hope I live that long. Ravyn hunched over the glowing computer screen, green light glinting off sweat beading on her forehead. She'd been huddled for hours, and yet she couldn't pull herself away from the machine. Every article she read made the previous pale in comparison as the web of lies and intrigue drew her deeper. What are you doing? Ravyn gasped and whirled, snatching a screwdriver from her desk. She thrust it toward the doorway where Atoll stood, rubbing bloodshot eyes. She took a deep breath and let her hand fall back to her side. You gave me a heart attack, and you woke me up. Ravyn wiped her eyes and dropped the screwdriver back to the desk with a dull clunk. If it helps, I don't think I'll ever be able to sleep again. Atoll sighed and slumped into a rickety chair. What are you doing? I'm looking up previous winners of the Fairest of Them All. Checking out the competition? No. Atoll, you wouldn't believe some of these stories. Conspiracy theorists, ignore them. No, some of them make good points, like how the Queen managed to stay so young-looking for so many years. Botox? Ravyn rolled her eyes. No. I suppose they have some crackpot theories about her eating babies or something. They call it Calanto, something the robots mine in the outer settlements and then ship to the castle. Atoll sighed and hung his head. That doesn't make any sense. She couldn't run an entire mining operation without anyone knowing. I think you've been up reading for too long. Fine, ignore the mining. What about all the previous winners of the contest? What about them? They've all gone missing or had terrible accidents. He frowned and leaned forward. What do you mean? There have been 10 people who have beaten Queen Elena in the last 20 years. 3 of them went missing after winning and were never seen again. 1 slipped during his celebration and sliced off his ear. 1 fell in front of a car and was crushed. 1 was mugged and stabbed. 1... Adel held up his hand. Are you suggesting what I think you are? Ravyn bit her lip and glanced back at the screen. Her heart thrummed against her ribs as the twisting fear settled lower in her stomach like a solid weight. She gets rid of the competition. End chapter 2. Make sure to like and subscribe so that you'll know when new chapters are released.